although it may not be this week.
Yeah, I thought. Oh, there's Josh. So I think we're good.
Hey, Josh.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today on this
Oh, we-
fine Monday?
I always somehow I put this on my calendar originally as a weekly call, and then every week it's an adventure to see if this is happening.
Awesome, but you get a free hour that week. That means
I do like that part.
I have a couple meetings I don't go to anymore that I keep on my calendar because it's like, you know what? No one schedules over this. I'm just gonna leave this one ride.
Excellent.
I'll admit that sometimes I will tentatively accept a meeting invite just so it stays on my calendar, and just maybe to discourage anybody out there.
That's right.
Get
Yep.
so filled up that you hardly get any of the stuff you actually need to get done because you're in meetings all the time.
Definitely. All right, I'll be right back. We got a few minutes. I've got to get my tea bag out of my cup.
It's maybe the wrong audience for this, but has anyone heard from RSA? Trying to figure out planning for later this month or for later April.
Is there a Vex or Sbomb day at RSA this year, Alan?
I think we're going to have another meetup hosted by Sbomb. I thought that they did a decent job not being salesy. And there's going to be some discussion at a couple of side meetings. And we will see whether there are a handful of talks and panels and such. It's always nice when, other people pick up the ball and run with it. But
It's the dream, man. Right. Wow, this is light today, but I'm not totally surprised. All right, let's just jump right in then. I'm not going to worry about anything else. So the group was working on, I gotta find the document now. The Sbomb everywhere goals and purpose, which is lost in my tabs. Here we are. I've got kind of two agenda items, but this is the big one. So I want to turn this into a working session. And we actually have a really good group of people for this, which makes me happy. But this document is what we are trying to explain the purpose of this group is, which is always it's one of those things that feels easy, but isn't. And it amuses me every time I go through this exercise. I'll just share my screen so we can go through it. It's the same document. I just pasted in the chat. So the idea is to use this to guide everything this group does into the future. And I spent some time over the break kind of turning it into a mostly readable document, but I would value feedback from everyone here. So we can kind of start at the top. There's the overview. The overview is the weak section because I feel like the rest of it will define it. So we're not going to focus on that today. So let's start at mission. And what we came up with, and this is me turning an enormous amount. Also, I can't see the chat very well if someone put something in there. Okay. So we spent the last couple weeks, probably a month or more, just jotting down ideas and notes, and then I tried to craft those into English text, which is what we're looking at here. And so I don't want to change the intent necessarily of any of this, but I think I want to make sure it's worded in a way that makes sense. Alan, what do you mean explicit Fastlink?
Is that something that we want to make? Do we want to sort of say, hey, how do we get Sbomb metadata into the open source world? Do we want that explicitly, or is that something that isn't necessary to put in the mission or the scope?
So that's a really good question. The intent of the group is I forked to a degree where I think we want to focus on empowering open source to create Sbombs, like have every project make it. So on the production side, there's a very heavy open source focus, but on the consumption side, we have an interest in furthering kind of all endeavors in that space. There are open source consumption tools and there are commercial consumption tools, and we don't want to necessarily say, this is the right one, this is the wrong one, and you should only use open source or anything. So that's, I'm going to add a note. Focus on open source creation. I don't know what to call it.
Sbomb data in open source projects.
There, I like that. That's good. Focus on in open source projects. We'll put, hey, creation, but also on open source and commercial consumption tools. And that also ties into, there's a second document, this landscape funding proposal, which did not, what have I done? There we go, which we may not get to today, but this is meant to be, I know I've talked about this at length, so I won't like torture anyone today. Creating like a CNCF landscape style thing for Sbombs, and that will encompass closed source as well as open source solutions. We want to landscape the entire Sbomb universe, not just the open source piece of it, which is a little weird for OpenSSF, but we think there's value in it. And I also think it would be unnecessarily crippling of this group if we only focus on open source. So anyway, okay, that's a good question though. So work with the existing Sbomb community, and in the mission, we try not to specifically call out open source, but I think we should specifically do it, because if we don't, people might assume open source. So I'm going to add another note for myself. Open and commercial to avoid anyone making assumptions. And that's one of the things that makes this hard too, is like, I've been looking at this stuff for months at this point. And so there's lots of things I think in my head make sense that won't. So it also, anyone here, or Arno, just jump in. You don't have to raise your hand. There's not enough people here today to.
All right, that sounds good. Thanks. I mean, so my question is actually, how do we define Sbomb community or the existing Sbomb community in this case?
Yeah, we're not going to define that.
As someone who has been trying to foster it for many years now, yeah, defining it is tricky. Defining any community is tricky. I'll let Josh define the open source community.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Good one. No, but so seriously though, I mean, the problem is, especially, you know, if you take just that mission statement, to me, it's going to raise a lot of questions, because the Sbomb community can be interpreted as, you know, people were already using Sbomb who are potentially interested in Sbombs, people who are working on Sbomb formats, Sbomb tools. I don't know.
And I'd say yes, at least as someone who's tried to build a community. If you do it without both a production side and a consumption side at the table, you're going to fail. If you do it with just one of the two data formats, you're going to fail. If you do it with just the vendors that are focused on Java and modern web apps, you're going to fail. So I think having a broad definition is good, and we can even, you know, have a line and scope about the importance of diversity of perspectives or something.
Yeah, I'm comfortable leaving this one squishy for the moment. We can tighten it up later. I mean, as these things always go, the devil's in the details, right? And it's easy to spend, you know, months on defining community when it really does. I don't think it matters in this case. So, okay. Create and consume Sbombs, that was an important point, because at first when this group was created, the focus was on open source project creating Sbombs, but nearly everyone who has come to meetings wants focus on consumption as well, which I think is fair, because it's very chicken and egg, which I'm sure Alan has much to say in that regard. So then user resources available to OpenSSF, encourage others to cooperate. So the cooperation part, I don't know if this is a little more clear in the approach maybe, but one of the things we want this group to do is not to reinvent the wheel over and over again. There are countless groups working on all kinds of stuff. Every single one of these meetings we've had, I learn about a new group doing something. And we would like to make it easier to discover these groups and encourage the groups to work together than trying to reinvent something ourselves. And that's, like, I think the foundation of this group is, I always joke, I say, we don't want to do any work. And fundamentally, we just want to empower others to be doing the work and make ourselves a place people can come to understand what's happening in the universe, if that makes sense. Does that, what do we think? Does this mission accomplish that? Are we missing something? I'm happy for quick thoughts.
I really liked the words you used, collaborate and empower. And I feel like those two words were more meaningful than cooperate, although I get where you're coming from, but collaborate and empower.
Okay, I'm going to add a note about that.
One question regarding the first sentence. So the Sbomb community, well, enable the Sbomb community to connect and empower that community to create and consume Sbomb. So it does make sense. It gives it kind of a reasonable scope, in the sense that those people who are interested in Sbombs will be empowered to create and consume Sbombs. But by reading through it the first two times, I was missing the bigger picture. Are we not aiming for enabling the, let's say, the very broadest vision, the open source community, like the projects, to create and consume Sbombs? Or is that, let's say, anyway, an unrealistic goal, and we would like to focus on the Sbomb community, whatever that is, but at least it kind of encodes that it's the people who have an interest in working with Sbombs. So does that make sense? What's the the scope of the users, so to say? Or is it
That's a
just
good
nitpicking?
point. I
Yes.
think that's something that I hear a lot in the OpenSSF governing board meetings is how do you get the creators of open source and the maintainers of the projects to be a part of the community in which, you know, maybe a third party vendor is consuming what they do. And those are two very different
Right.
personas.
That's a good point. Yes, we should clarify that because the intent is to help non-Sbomb using people today get connected with the Sbomb resources they need. That is the oh man, that's the vision, right? I'm gonna
Okay.
Well said. Please write that down.
yes. All right, I'll make a note of that. Great. This is why I like these meetings. Okay.
So I have to say, I like the simplification and clarification committee, which addresses some of my problems initially I was trying to talk to. And in that line, do we need the existing in the beginning there? I don't know that it has anything.
Probably not. I'm happy to pull that out. That feels like something I added as part of a different sentence.
Thanks.
Well, and I feel like maybe that's where you were trying to get to the part where we don't want to create something new. We want to leverage, you know, the ideas of the commuting. So I get where I kind of get both sides. The word existing is, I think there might be another way to kind of keep honing in on the root of the word existing, of why you put that in there.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, but I mean, first, you know, we agreed we're not going to define precisely what this is. So, and it's an evolving body, right? So I don't know that the existing adds, but it's fine.
Maybe we say evolving body, you know, because there is, we do know that there is maybe we haven't found exactly the right phrase yet, but there is some sort of existing group, but it is also evolving.
And I mean, hopefully it's a growing community, right? So
Hopefully, yes.
yeah, that's the whole point.
Indeed. Indeed. I love it. Okay. All right. All right. So I guess my ask for the group then is just think about this one. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But if you have comments, throw them in the document or Slack or whatever, and we'll work on it. I want to try to get this finished up like in the next meeting, just because we've been working on this what feels like forever. And then the scope is kind of trying to hone the mission a little bit. This focuses on production, distribution, and consumption of Sbomb data for the adoption, using information ingest, want to remove blockers that make using Sbomb hard. I mean, this sentence doesn't really make sense in its own context, which it kind of touches on in the approach, but this scope I feel like is the most squishy of everything we've done, because this is really hard to do. Okay, so I'm going to read this out loud and just yell if anything comes to mind. So we have securing the software ecosystem will require making the production, distribution, and consumption of Sbomb data easy to enable wide adoption, using the information, ingesting it into their own internal risk management systems or other systems. They have to remove blockers to make using the Sbombs hard. Alan, since you're here, how do we talk about Sbombs in plural? Is a plural of Sbomb, or is it Sbombs? Do we know? Is that like decided on?
I think it's Sbombs with an S.
It is with an S. Okay.
It's a freestanding.
I've had more than one conversation about
Right. It's the problem where it's software bills of material, but it's a freestanding, widely used acronym, and so you just append a S on the end.
Okay. All right. All right. And I think this is the sentence that I want to focus on, and I think is important, especially in the context of open source, is in a lot of open source projects, they're just going to be creating an Sbomb and giving it to someone else. They're not going to be really doing anything with it per se. And I think that's the piece that isn't necessarily well understood in the universe, because I feel like in many instances, the person creating the Sbomb is the person consuming the Sbomb today. And that's something we want to see, I guess, change, especially in open source. So that needs to be expanded. I'm just going to add a note for myself.
And I think this kind of gets to, I think it was George's point that the community is creating it, but if they don't understand how it's going to be used, that might impact how rigorous they are about creating it, or the completeness in which they create it. And so it's in part, yes, maybe a software development company or hardware company is using it, creating it, and passing it on further, but how can we be very inclusive of the open source community and those maintainers to be diligent about it, because they may never consume it and see how it's done. So coming from a security operations background, we get these, oh, if only the developer would have made XYZ in the logs available. Well, the developer never in a million years knew that was going to be a use case. So there's a big chasm between, the consumption of software and the security, like quote unquote, bolting it on at the end, and the developer upstream understanding the use cases and building in those security components by default as just part of their process. I think that's the chasm we're trying to cross with these bill of materials.
So I never thought of it in this way, because I feel like if we have well-defined standards for SBOMs, which like SPDX and CycloneDX have, there's the NTIA minimum elements. And so if you're generating correct outputs for whatever it is you're doing, wouldn't that suffice for someone using it? Or is there a piece of that we're missing?
I think it would suffice today, but it may evolve. And so how do you get the left hand and the right hand in ongoing cooperation? And I guess maybe that's the standards development. But then if you have some very, free-spirited open source developers that, maybe they have an enterprise day job and this is something they're doing on the side for fun, how do we encourage the use of following a standard when the upstream community can potentially be very, I don't know, free-spirited in a way? That's part of it, the beauty of open source.
I'm inclined to punt on that, because you're not wrong, but I feel like as long as we have standards, excuse me, that are well supported and have active communities around them, I think this problem will solve itself, because you'll have good tooling, and I would hope we won't see a situation where, for example, someone starts publishing like SPDX 2.3 and now we're on SPDX 6 and they're like, whatever, it's good enough, right? I would hope we have some level of just community pressure and involvement that keeps all this flowing forward.
I hope so too. I just also know that sometimes hope isn't a strategy.
Hope is
And
all we
so-
have.
And I don't think this group wants to just be a hopeful, wishful group. So how can we just make sure those dots are being connected? And I'm fine punting it too, because I don't know the answer. I'm just putting it out there.
So we kind of have some of this in the approach where we have, where was it? Yeah, like starting with existing known projects, creating kind of a white glove service to learn what does it mean to help an open source project create Sbombs and distribute them. And then obviously as we learn more, then we can work on guidance like that. And hopefully it turns into, kind of a self-licking ice cream cone, to steal a term from the DC folks, of once we have this all in place, it just sustains itself. So
Can we add that? that this would become sustaining and a self-looking ice cream cone?
Yes, we should definitely add that.
Because I agree, this is more tactical and somewhat strategic, so less hopeful. It kind of defines the path. I like it.
Sustainable self-perpetuating process if we did.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, it is better than ice cream cone looking, although I like the visual there.
Self-licking ice cream cones are sometimes a little pejorative. CF. A lot of FFRDC work that the government pays for.
All right. Okay. All right. So then kind of next paragraph. Expected minimum elements and validation will there. So the purpose of this particular paragraph kind of is right now the NTIA guidance, and actually, Alan, is CISA going to take ownership of that guidance, or is the NTIA minimum elements like staying with NTIA?
No. So under the somewhat flawed OMB circular 22-18, CISA has authority to refine the minimum elements, so that it will be around for a little while, but ultimately CISA is going to enhance it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so for the moment, obviously we're going to defer to NTIA guidance. We put a line in here about
Josh,
in the future. Sorry, what?
I do also want to say, feel free to go beyond that minimum elements of guidance, because it was written to, the slight background was, right, it was defined at a point in time, which is 2021, and the author sort of had to do a balance between how do we make sure that we're not making something that's useless, but at the same time make sure that folks can actually achieve it at that point in time when it was defined. So I just want to.
That's right. Totally. And that's kind of the purpose of the second paragraph here is in the future, we may find it necessary to append this guidance, publish party group output, blah, 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 blah. And that is the intent, is ideally the knob will turn one way, right? And as we meet the current minimum guidance, we can add to the minimum guidance and add to the minimum guidance and just keep ratcheting that up as we go. And then there's also this bit here about validation tools. And this is something I know the SPDX folks have started working on, is kind of measuring the output of SPDX tools and being able to say, like, this is valid, this is invalid, this is good, this is bad. And I think this is part of that work. And I don't know off the top of my head what the Cyclone DX folks are doing here, but I suspect they have similar projects. And ideally, we leverage the validation tools to kind of just control what is considered minimum and good. And we have, I think we have some notes about that somewhere down here in approach, but okay. But the point being that for the beginning, we're going to leverage the guidance that exists. We don't want to publish something new. All right, keep going. All right, so it says the group is meant to focus how to bring Sbombs everywhere. The everywhere focus of this is what we talked about up here about not just open source. How do we encourage open source projects to build and consume high quality Sbombs? Yes. Sbombs everywhere wants to encourage this behavior through funding the creation of tooling and guidance. So this is one of the other pieces to this, is like the OpenSSF has the ability to fund certain things, for example, and we want to maybe go out and help projects as well as fund projects when that makes sense. And the going out and helping is like, that's easy to say, but it's hard to get people to do that. And so that's going to be one of, I think, the things we have to understand is how do we create like a group of people capable and willing to help with this. And this is one of the places, I think, leaning on some of the OpenSSF members to, you know, pledge maybe some resources for this goal, but that's a whole other can of worms. So anyway, funding creation of tools and guidance. This group should not be focused on creating new content. Yes, there it is, but rather lifting up the existing efforts. And that obviously means when someone wants to work on something and there's a group already doing it, go help the group. Don't reinvent the wheel again. This sentence, this paragraph feels boring to me, but I think it's well explained. Questions, comments, concerns? Again, if you have thoughts or comments, feel free to just add them later. We don't have to do this all right now. But I do want to have this done in like a week or two, not 2, well, 2 or 4 weeks from now, right? That's the goal. Next meeting or the meeting after to clean this up. So speak up or you don't get a say. And then the approach is where we get a little more tactical and we kind of lay down some of the things we want to do specifically. It is not exactly in an order, but it kind of is. I would say the more important things are near the top, and the things that need other things in place first. I won't say they're less important. They're harder to do tactically without doing some of this other stuff first. So the first one is the landscape. We have a document for this. It was here, it's in the notes. If you want to look at it, I would gladly accept comments on the landscape proposal. The landscape proposal, we want to go to the OpenSSF governing board and basically just hold up the hat and say, can we fund this? And can we get someone to do it? And ideally, it again becomes a what did we call it? Alan's fancy word.
Self-perpetuating.
Thank you. I've already lost it. Where was it? Anyway, self-perpetuating. We want the landscape. Ideally, if we have a landscape that becomes a place people are looking for things, new projects will be encouraged to add their stuff to it, right? Because they know if they're not in the landscape, they don't exist. And so hopefully we get that. So anyway, current landscape, identify existing tools, projects, companies, whatever, all of it, right? We want, if it's involved in Sbomb, we want it on our landscape. We don't care who it is or what it is or how it works. We want it all. And then again, creating new standards, not something we want to do.
Rather than just how it works, Josh.
Sorry, what, Kate?
There just needs to be some degree of quality here, rather than anything throw it up and there's no quality, then that's going to potentially be an issue.
What do you mean by no quality? You mean like people throwing up their 6-line GitHub project they wrote in an hour, or
claiming to do something and not doing it, even more importantly? Okay, I think there does need to be some element of quality for this to be useful. Otherwise, it's just it could cause more confusion than it'll sort.
That is a very good point. That hasn't been on my radar at all. I don't.
Yeah, I like the quality stuff. And it is a fun philosophical question of, is partial or incomplete data better than no data? I may respectfully disagree with Kate about the immediacy of putting quality on the radar. But I don't disagree with her about the long-term goal of putting quality on the radar.
I just think that, having at least someone say that, yes, this is there and I've used it, would get rid of a lot of the problems.
Good.
Okay, which is part of a review process.
Yes. And I mean, a landscape exists as a GitHub repository. Someone has to approve a PR.
Correct.
And so we have a gate. We just have to figure out what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, oh man, this is giving me flashbacks to some of the old open source days where the gate became people I like. and it gets weird fast. But let's ignore that for the moment, and we can, maybe Brian has some thoughts on that, because I'm sure this exists elsewhere in the OpenSSF or other things, right? So, all right, so landscape, we view the landscape kind of as the foundation of a lot of this stuff. And so we're keen to get that proposal in front of the governing board at some point in the near future. So again, then what else do we have? So we have use OpenSSF resources to encourage Sbomb adoption with a focus on creating consumption. So here's where we want to find a way to get some of the existing OpenSSF members to basically bring some talent to the table, because there's a lot of talk about Sbombs. There's a lot of people working on Sbombs. And so I think this I'm hopeful we can do something with this. I don't know for sure, because like I think the OpenSSF, while it has been wildly successful in acquiring funding and publishing content, I don't think it's been wildly successful in connecting talent with projects necessarily. So this one I think will be tough, and we're going to need governing board and TAC involvement, I think, to try to get existing members involved. And this will probably require another proposal written. Any thoughts or comments on this?
I agree, and I think that this is a piece where we get a lot of value out of the OpenSSF, bringing together a lot of the different tech companies in the community. That if they're using an open source tool and they want to see it grow, then we can funnel them to that. There's a huge interest at my company at Dell in connecting with some of the efforts around Sbomb. And it's been challenging to figure out exactly where to go to send people. And so I think evolving this is a critical piece, and one in which, by the way, I would be willing to help with the proposal.
Fantastic. And we can start on that literally anytime. So
Okay, adding that to the list.
yeah, that's fantastic. No work has been done. If you want to take a crack at it, Sarah, and just like put out a rough draft or something, if you have ideas, I'm game, because
Okay.
it'll be at least probably 2 weeks before I'm going to touch it, because I want to get the landscape proposal sorted first. So I'm not going to put effort into it. But yeah, this is awesome.
I'll try to take a crack at it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to make a note here. Whoops. That way I know who to bug later. Okay, so the next one, this one actually is something Kate and I were talking about last week. Near-term wins, but with the end goals in mind. So things like Sbomb example references. I know the SPDX crew is working on some quality tools for basically like measuring, does your Sbomb meet the minimum NTIA standards? And a lot don't. And I'm also keen on having good examples where we have artifacts and we have expected outputs, and then being able to obviously run tools that scan the artifacts and then output whatever it is they output, and then they can say like, are you finding all the right things? And I'm actually in a discussion right now, because the question becomes, what is more important, quality, measuring quality, or example references? Should one come before the other? And I think they're completely related, because you can have a tool that finds all the artifacts and outputs bad Sbombs, and you can have a tool that outputs correct Sbombs but doesn't find all the artifacts. So I think it's two difficult and strange problems. So anyway, but this one, I don't know where this will go yet. I think it has to live in this group, because like SPDX has some examples, but I'm sure CycloneDX won't want to touch their examples. And if CycloneDX has examples, I'm sure SPDX won't want to use their examples. So I think having a neutral place for the examples and for the expected output is probably what we're going to do. And this turns into another one of those things. We need people to do the work. And I don't know what that means yet, but I think this one comes after these other two, because I think, like, for example, if we can leverage resources, hopefully we have people in a position to start helping with something like this. And then they can obviously take the examples and go to the tools and go to SPDX and CycloneDX and wherever they need to go to help kind of push the ideas and help with whatever anyone needs help with, because this is new territory for many of us. So anyway,
Josh, can I just, oh, go ahead, George.
Just something that came to my mind in this context. In terms of encouraging the adoption by open source projects, I think it could make sense to also include use cases or success stories not coming out of the Sbomb community itself, like the SPDX community kind of trying to show off the tooling, but also like success stories from projects that have already successfully adopted that. Like we had one person who relatively successfully included SPDX Sbomb generation in Istio, and that was well accepted or well welcomed, and so on and so forth. It might just add to, so it's just a complementary thing, but if you are going to kind of write down maybe guides or something like this, it can add to the adoption or the authenticity of what we're trying to do by pointing to projects who have already successfully done this, and also showing that it's feasible and so on, and not just something coming out of the specific tooling community trying to sell their tool. So just a slightly different take on it, but I think both are complementary. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, the other one, in addition to Istio, there's the Yocto community too.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, and they've gone in and been pretty active.
I agree 100%. And in fact, the funny enough, we put it's at the very bottom, which it probably shouldn't be at the very bottom, but we have celebrate wins, right? Where as there is success, we need to talk about the success. And I think the OpenSSF has a lovely pulpit for that, because when the OpenSSF speaks, people listen. And everything from, things that went well, things that maybe didn't go well, ways to encourage, any sort of carrots we can throw out. Absolutely. And I love success stories. I think that's a really good one, and we didn't have that written down. So I wrote it down. All right, Alan, you were going to say something?
I was on the sort of badging side, which could be under number 2 and is a number 5. And that actually could be, right, the informal standards model of saying, hey, to get the badge, here's what we're looking for, as a way of moving the ball forward on something that's a little more ambitious than the 2021 minimum elements, but still something that's feasible. And so that will be work, but could also be a very good way to leverage our efforts.
Yeah, 100%. We need Sbomb levels, right, to match salsa levels. Where
I'm gonna have to go find another snack to backronym.
Indeed.
But I think that the Sbomb badges create a data point that consumers can key off of, potentially even programmatically. We want to consume from open source that has this Sbomb badge. I know if people are talking about, internally we're talking about tying what we select to scorecards.
Yep.
And metrics, and ways to put, connect data points into your CI/CD pipeline and on automation. So this creates something that is a badge for the developer of the open source package, but that also creates some pipeline and some workflows of, hey, we want to consume from open source that has these badges.
Yep.
I think that also does the what was the word you used, Alan? Self-verification. Like, it continues to develop and evolve on its own. It starts to build momentum.
Yes, 100%, Sarah. I think the intent of the badges is so scorecard can pick them up, basically, right?
Yes.
Yep, 100%. Our time. Okay, so then we have, so under the near-term wins with like we put in, and this one isn't well defined. I need to write this out better, but we wrote down start with tool sets will be fastest to release and economically efficient, acknowledging there will be some developer friction. So the intent behind this statement was kind of saying, let's pick a few things out of the gate and suggest, like, this is the fastest way open source project you can produce Sbombs with the minimal amount of pain for the moment, and basically create like some concrete guidance that specifically calls out tools that says, like, if you're using Java, this tool does a nice job. If you're using NPM, this tool does a nice job. And this one is going to be dicey because this puts us in a position of being a kingmaker, essentially, because anything we pick is going to win, at least in the short term and probably in the long term. And that terrifies me, and it's going to piss off a lot of people. And so I don't know a good way to do this, but I also think it's the fastest way to kind of roll this ball down the hill.
Could you
would
tie
value
this
thoughts.
idea to the Sbomb badges, where it's not being a kingmaker necessarily? It's just creating a set of standards, and here's a best practice, and you'll get a badge if you do this. Here's some good examples of people who have done this. And then the badges democratize it. You can go out and get the badge yourself if you want to.
So the concern I have with that is, if you say to a project, you should create an Sbomb, now they're faced with the paradox of choice, because there are a lot of Sbomb tools that exist today, and they are of varying quality. Whereas if you say, we built a GitHub action or whatever that will generate an Sbomb for your Java project, use this, right? Now it's a concrete thing they can do and get a concrete output from, and they don't have to spend a week researching Sbomb tools.
Yeah, that's the term that's getting thrown around on the governing board is the word Sterling toolchain.
Yes, it's exactly that.
And like, what does that mean? But
well,
that
it's
that
meaningless.
is an example of a piece of the Sterling toolchain.
Right, absolutely, it absolutely is. And there's no way we can do this without getting someone mad at us, and that concerns me a little bit. This one is so hard. I don't know what the best way to do this is, and it scares me every time I read it. Because we need to give concrete advice to projects, because projects do not want to be Sbomb experts. But we also, how do we pick one? I don't know. And then, so following up on this one is we have kind of part B being, we acknowledge that any project creating Sbombs today, it's not going to be a zero effort thing. They're going to have problems. There are going to be bugs. There's going to be weird little things that happen. They're going to have to address. And obviously, open source projects have finite resources. Long term, the goal is zero effort, where if you're an open source project and you push this button, you get an Sbomb. And like, that's it. And that's a dream. And I know we'll never actually get there, but like, that's kind of the intent of part C here. And, and then D is where we have an architect to put tool sets in place, right? Where we have, how do we define what these tool sets look like? And that was why I guess that ties into B, because like an example being, if we spend a week putting together an example tool chain today, in a month, it's probably out of date, because these tools and this stuff all moves really fast right now. And so it would be ideal in this architect, we wrote this before the governing board was talking about bringing on board like an architect for the Sterling toolchain work. And so I think that's very related. So I'm going to ignore this for the moment, and we can maybe tie it into that. But this one is big, and I don't know. I would love input if someone has it, because I'm terrified of this particular like kind of goal. Like, how do we do this in a way that doesn't make everyone mad at us, except the project we pick, and then they'd love us? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
I think
But do
that,
we, sorry, go
sorry.
ahead, Ivana, please.
I was going to say that if we just have an objective description of every project and what it does, what it covers, then people should be capable of choosing on themselves based on the criteria that are described, that are objective and matching the project documentations. So there shouldn't be anything that would cause conflict in this way, because it would stick to every project's documentation, and it would be like an resume of it, and sharing some key details. So this would allow people to choose themselves. For example, if you say this project supports this and doesn't support that, this would be a good guidance, and I don't see why it would cause conflict if it's super short and objective.
I think you've just inspired me. Ivana, it's brilliant, because if we make the projects give the guidance necessary, like if we had, say, a central repository that says, here are Sbomb scanners, here's how to use them in certain instances, projects fill it out. That also turns into a self-selecting cycle of projects that aren't active don't update their content, right? Projects that are active have an incentive to participate in this ecosystem and to keep their content relevant, which then solves the problem we have of D, of as things age, well, if they're old, you know, it's a project that's not very active, versus if their guidance or action or whatever is current, you know, the project is active.
Could that tie into like LFX, where they're just trying to put data points about how current projects are, how frequently they're updated, if you know, if the Sbomb components are evolving? I think it could potentially tie in there too.
Yeah, I think it's similar for sure. I think they're very, very related. And I'm gonna, so for anyone who doesn't know, I work for a company called Anchor. We have a project called SIF that generates Sbombs. I'm going to bring this idea back to my people and see if they're horrified by this or if they think it might be not a bad idea. And this is something we can actually do with minimal effort on our side, because we just need to reach out to a couple projects, get them to provide some guidance, and we can put it all in GitHub and let people just submit pull requests. And I think this one might be easy. I'm going to...
Josh, isn't this effectively just the outscribbing the landscape?
I think it's more than just a landscape though, Kate. I think it would be in the landscape, but I think this goes even a step farther of saying, like, let's say you're a Java application. Oh, I see what you're saying. How to sort this out. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Saying like, I need...
put a link to, let them put a link to where they have this documentation in their own project so that they can find, people can find it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know if I want the document in the project versus in something we control so we can watch freshness. I don't know. I need to think about that. I don't know. Anyway.
So what I wanted to say, yeah, Josh, I think that's a good idea. And I also think you don't need to be overly terrified by this vision, because at the end of the day, I think this is exactly like how the open source ecosystem kind of works. There's a constant competition between projects, and people tend to find out relatively quickly which ones are active and work better. And as soon as we start publishing examples showing off that it's relatively easy to use and the result has a relatively high quality, as I said before, like these quick wins or so can add to that. And maybe this would be the middle ground to try to approach this, instead of saying we have officially picked this tool, but instead we're going to publish a set of 5 examples showing the success of those tools. I don't know, just wanted to add that.
I also agree this is a reasonable approach. We'll just need a proper disclaimer so that people understand we're not actually endorsing this. We are not like guaranteeing any level of quality or anything. And this is like a people, self-registration of their tools that people should consider for those use cases.
Yeah. I'm gonna think about this one.
I think each entry should probably have some kind of date associated, when it was submitted, because keeping track of, those things getting stale is a huge hassle. So we should make it so that it's kind of self-explanatory. You know, if you see an entry that's really old, well, maybe you need to look a bit more closely into it, and we can just provide the right information to the readers so they can do their own homework.
100%. Yep. All right, so we're almost out of time, so I want to jump to 4. I think 5 is pretty self-explanatory, and then so 4 was where we start talking about incentives, and I think this is always the challenge, and I don't know, these were just some ideas we threw out. This is more brainstorming than anything, but obviously the issue being, if we say open source, we would love it if you would make Sbombs, and open source says, we don't care what you think. Like that's it, that we're done. And so this is one of the challenges, is how do we create incentives and encouragement for these projects? Because we also don't want to show up and say, do what we're telling you to do, because that doesn't work, you know?
And forgive me, I'm gonna have to jump in a moment, but right, is looking for those middle grounds, which is like, hey, here's some tools, or hey, can we go in and put some Sbomb data at the top of, and so one thing that we can do is say, hey, is there any recommendations we can come together for saying, where does Sbomb data go in a general project or in a specific type of project? And that also loops back to the package manager stuff, which is, hey, let's ask some of the PyPy folks where to go in a Python project. Let's ask NPM folks, et cetera.
Yeah, because I know like Maven it's defined where to put Sbombs in that universe, right? Not all the package system, and there's a packaging group here, so we can talk to them, but this one is really squishy, and I know we all have to leave, but I would love it if anyone has ideas or comments to just like look through this one and give what your feedback, because I think incentives are going to be the hardest part. Is like, we're asking an open source project to do something that they will receive minimal to no benefit from, is what I think some of this is. And so how do we either show value? How do they extract value from this? I don't know. I don't have good answers, but I think that's part of the challenge here, because today, I think asking open source projects to do this stuff isn't going to end well. I think they're grumpy, as they should be, because they have a lot of people pushing back on them for a lot of stuff. So, all right, it's time. This was super valuable. I want to thank everyone for all their feedback. I've really enjoyed this today. I love these working sessions like this. So, all right. And Sarah, if you start working on that proposal and you have questions or comments, like feel free to use Slack or hit me up or whatever, because I'm really excited.
I will definitely do that. This is
Awesome.
exciting for me too, because that's the piece I've been
Perfect.
beating a drum on. So I'm excited.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.